What's up, everybody? It's your favorite sociologist and identity professor, Aurelia Johnson, founder of the Owned Project. Today is our second video. We're talking about conflict theory. Our first video was about structural functionalism, and this is our university experience. So conflict theory, a lot like structural functionalism, is a paradigm that looks at large numbers of people, or it could be called a macro level of analysis. Macro means big groups, big numbers. You're talking about millions of people. So Durkheim who's a structural functionalist, looked at patterns of behavior, much like Marx wanted to look at what were the impacts of capitalism on the proletariat, which is the working class, large population of people that are competing for resources against what he called the bourgeoisie, which were the owners of production. So according to conflict theory, you have these groups that are competing or warring against each other for scarce resources. Conflict theory's main concepts are conflict, struggle, inequality, stratification, power, exploitation, alienation, estrangement. These were the things that you'll hear when you're talking about a conflict paradigm. I think what's most interesting about conflict theory are the sociologists or the theorists who created the foundation for this particular paradigm. Most people are going to talk about Marx. Like, you're always going to hear Karl Marx. You're always going to hear Friedrich Engels, right? I think the disadvantage that we have as sociologists or people that are in the academy is that we don't always lean towards W.E.B. Du Bois, who was a conflict theorist. We don't always lean towards Ida B. Wells Barnett, who was a conflict theorist, right? She wrote the Red Record. She went down to the South. She did a sociological analysis on lynching, and she published this book in like 1897, I think, right? So conflict theorists are people who are always looking at the way that there is a struggle in society and why these two groups are actually going at each other. Marx would say that it's because capitalism as a system benefits and profits off of the exploitation of the many. The few own everything. The many work for the few, and they work for quote unquote living wages, right? So it's not that what you're putting into the labor is what you're getting out in a paycheck, right? Because these people are being exploited. They're also being what he called alienated, which means that the type of labor that they produce is honestly only to get a living wage. It has nothing to do with their purpose. It has nothing to do with who they are as a person, with their talents and their abilities. It's you are being exploited to get something done so somebody else can live out their self-actualized lives, right? So let's bring it on into a context that we can understand more, which is like gender, right? So if you're looking at gender from a conflict perspective, you're looking at inequality between males and females. You're looking at inequality between cisgendered people and transgendered people and gender non-conforming people. You're looking at inequality between white males and black males. You're looking at inequality that happens between white females and black females. It's a classification, right? And so when you're talking about classification or stratification in society, it is how we group people and then how we place them in a social hierarchy. So we know that white men in America make more money than any other social group in America. And that's due to, according to a conflict theorist, it's due to the power structure which puts maleness, whiteness as being heterosexualness, Christianness as being supreme. And anything out that falls outside of that purview or outside of those labels are then considered to be other and inferior, if that makes sense, right? So conflict theory is a very interesting paradigm, and a lot of people usually lean toward conflict theory because it gets to the root of the struggle that people, especially economically, it gets to the root causes of why we have these disparities and disadvantages in society. Conflict theory, unlike structural functionalism, says inequality exists. And the reason why people are not able to obtain the American dream is because there are other social factors that are having an impact on their ability to be successful. If you're born to poor parents, and these are working class people, and they may not be educated or only have a high school diploma or a GED, they're more likely going to reproduce another generation of working class people who would only have a high school diploma or a GED. The other thing about conflict theory, when you're talking about the reproduction of a labor force or social reproduction, it happens, with gender. It happens with sexual orientation. It happens when you're talking about religion. Christians are probably going to reproduce Christians. Heterosexual people are going to do their best to reproduce heterosexual people. Does that make sense? Like, if you're talking about masculinity in a conflict theory perspective, masculinity says that anything that goes against masculinity or steps outside the norm of masculinity or transgresses against masculinity, like, it is a problem, and that it's causing a problem, and so therefore we should attack the problem, right? The other thing you'll see is you'll have people who will have an issue with immigrants, right? So there's this conflict that's happening between people that are born within a nation state and then people that are coming into that nation state from outside. So then you'll have this whole, especially when you're talking about the whole concept of white supremacy and white masculinity, when you have immigrants coming into the country and these white males who may not be the best skilled laborers, they may not be the most educated, they would like to lean on the thought that the immigrants are coming in and taking their jobs. And so therefore there's a clash between native born people and people that are coming in, that are immigrating into the society, right? That's a conflict theoretical perspective. That is one way that people would explain it. When you're talking about conflict theory, there's something called critical race theory, which falls under this big umbrella of conflict. And so then people in critical race theory, they use that to explain the racial tensions in America. These people that are competing for these scarce resources. So the people that we're going to talk about this semester are Karl Marx. I'm going to talk about Du Bois, who wrote The Souls of Black Folk. We're going to talk about Ida B. Wells Barnett, and we are going to talk about Friedrich Engels. And we're going to make sure that we are able to navigate conflict theory in a way that you can figure out, does it lend to your lens, how you're looking at society. And then we'll get into the third video, which is about symbolic interactionism. And then when you can start looking at each one of them to figure out, how do you look at society? You already have a lens, but you just need the language to go along with your lens, so then you can complete your analytical pieces.